Hey there, so in this video I'm going to be doing a web challenge from the Cyber Apocalypse 2022 CTF. I'm going to be doing the challenge Amidst Us. Here is the info if you want it. And the clips for this challenge is the application is running a vulnerable Python package pillow that is vulnerable to remote code execution, so we can use that to gain access and read the flag. So we have the source code for this challenge. So if we just jump into that, first thing I'll always look at is the Docker, just kind of get an idea for what's going on. We see it's using the Python Alpine image, and Alpine is just like a really tiny, lightweight Linux image. Looks like we're installing Flask, so this is going to be a Flask app. We see the flag is being placed as flag.txt into the root directory. Our working directory for the app is the app, root app. And then we see we're installing the requirements. This supervisor is just kind of tells Docker what to, this is a process manager, so it's just telling the container what to run when it loads up. If you see, it's just going to run Python app. It's going to run the runpy. If we look at this requirements.txt to get an idea for what packages are being installed, we see Pillow has to be version 8.4.0. And this is always kind of a big red flag to me, or something I definitely pay attention to whenever you're doing one of these challenges and they specifically require you to have a version as opposed to like anything newer than or whatever the latest version is. Often I think it's a big indicator that maybe there's a vulnerability in there, and that's why they need this specific version. So the first thing I always do when I see something like that is I just go ahead and we're going to Google that version and remember how to spell vulnerability. And let's go ahead and look and see what there is. And we see, the page isn't loading very well, but versions newer than 9, there's arbitrary code execution. So that's the kind of thing we would look at first. And it says that affected versions of this package vulnerable to code execution via the imagemath.eval. So we want to keep that in mind. And let's also go ahead and open up the pull request just so it's there if we run across this and are looking at the source code. Spoiler alert, we will. So then I just go ahead and I would jump in and let's see, I'd take a look at what we see. There's a normal endpoint and API, and then I'd look and see how the requests are being handled in the routes.py. We see we can make a GET request. It's just going to render the index HTML, and then we see we can make a POST request to this alphafy endpoint. And it's going to be JSON, and it needs to have an image key. And if we look to see what it does, then is it runs this make alpha function and passes in the JSON request. And we see that's coming from that util package. And so if we look and see what make alpha does, this data here, right, we want to follow our user controlled input, right? We're able to make a post request, so we can supply input. We want to follow that through the code and kind of see what interacts with it. We see we can have a background. If we don't give it background, so this basically is telling it like this is what it looks for, and if it's not, this is the like default. So if there is no background key in that dictionary, it's just going to set the value to that. But we also see it is that image key we needed. That's getting base 64 decoded. So it looks like we're going to be passing in a base 64, well, supposed to be passing in base 64 image. But if we keep following that through, we're going to see right here, we have that image math eval, which is what we wanted to look out for. And we know we can control color, and we see color is being passed into, these are lambda functions defined here. And so it's going to pass in our code that we control into this Lambda function that's getting run in the eval. So all things are pointing to us being able to actually exploit this bug or this vulnerability. So let's go ahead and look at what the pull request says, if we can get any more information out of it. And it looks like the little example they give is exec exit, which would just exit the thread or process, I think, that command is running in. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not like very good at Python. Looks like maybe we can do something with Lambda functions. But let's just go ahead and try. Well, first let's go ahead and actually take a look at the site. We still haven't actually done that yet. I did not open the browser. And again, another beautifully designed site where we see no file chosen. Looks like we can change some color stuff. I'm going to guess those are the color values we can pass in. That's 180, 95, 95. Looks like we get to, let's give it a image file. And it looks like it changed. So it's taking out an alpha channel or doing something. It looks like there's our original and there's our alphafied or alpha or whatever it did to it. But let's take an actual look at the request. Let's just go ahead and send this over to repeater. We see here is our base 64 image. We see it is the background. Those were the values. None of that port is just trying to get a feel for if it's working the way we think it is. And I'm guessing what it's sending back to us, we could figure that out if we actually went through the code and tried to figure out everything it's doing. But it looks like it's returning to us the base 64 encoded image of whatever it is doing inside this function. But we want to give this remote code execution thing a try. Let's see what happens if we're going to do it in the background one, if we just change one of these. So like here we see color. So the first function, I kind of want to use the first one, right? Because I'm not entirely sure how this works while we're testing it out, and we don't want to make it like color 1 or color 2 or something, and what we do causes an error here and we never get to here. So I always like to try and make it the first one that's going to get executed. So this is the first function. We see there's also evals here, but this is the first one, and this is the first time it looks like it's going to interact with it. So let's just change color 2 or color 0, and let's see what happens. Like, can we give it a string? Like, what's now I would think this would throw some kind of error because it's going to try and subtract what is source? I'm guessing it's a constant or something. I don't know, but I would think this wouldn't work. But let's see what happens if it. So we just get bad request. But let's go ahead and let's just try that payload that they said, hey, this is vulnerable to that. Should be careful. And we see we get no response back, which makes me think, hey, it's probably doing something. Now, if this were like a real kind of situation or a real engagement or whatever, you don't want to just be like spamming stuff, right? Because maybe this made the server crash or whatever. And they provide us with a Docker so we can very easily just set up our own environment and test it. And we can actually go in and figure out like what is happening and what's going on. But for the sake of a short video and the fact that it's just a CTF, so we're kind of more concerned about just getting to the answer and moving on to the next challenge, I would just go ahead and start trying to do stuff. So we know where the root flag is, right? And that's our goal, is to try and read the flag. So if we can actually run commands, like that'd be all we would need to do, right? So how this is getting executed inside an exec statement in Python. So we need to have it be able to access the file system. So we would want to import OS, and then we want to give it a command that we can use to somehow access that flag. And the one I would do is try to copy that flag, which we know is in the root folder, and try and copy it to somewhere we actually have access to look at. So if we look at application, usually there's the static, images, like we can see all these because we need to be able to load this, load the images for the site. So let's just go ahead and try to copy it there. We know it is in application, static, images, and we'll just call it flag.txt. And escape our closing parenthesis. That closes that. That closes that. And let's see what happens. So nothing happened. I mean, we don't get any input back, but let's check and see if we can see, did it copy the flag over? So we would look in static images flag.txt. And it would help if I typed it correctly. And there we go, we get the flag. So what happened is it executed our code. So we have remote code execution, and it copied the flag, which we knew was en route, copied it to somewhere we could read it, and then we just went there and read it. There's a bunch of different methods you could do to get the flag, but this is the one I went with. So pretty straightforward challenge, pretty simple. But like all these things, it's easy to get lost, especially if you're less experienced, because there's a lot going on. And if you don't find the vulnerability, then it's trying to debug and figure out reverse what all these things are doing. So I could see potentially spending a lot of time on this challenge in order to get it. So one of the kind of tips I would have is just to really just narrow your focus down. And the first thing you always do is look at the code and follow the user controlled input, follow it through the code. That's always going to be typically the most important thing, especially for like lower rated challenges. And if we did that, and then see what it's interacting with, and then we would have been able to find, so here we know this is interacting with image math, which we know is being imported from PIL. So then we could Google PIL and look for exploits that way, and we'd come across it. So really you want to focus first and foremost on how the code is interacting with the input you can control, because that's how you're going to affect things that the developer didn't intend to happen. So anyway, that's my little ramble, and yeah, I hope you got something out of this video, and yeah, that's it. Take care.